The quietest cry I ever heard during the war came from inside me. My name is Eleanor May Whitaker. I'm 86 years old, and I live alone in a wooden house that creaks even when the wind whispers. The walls know more than any living soul, and my old nurse's apron, still folded neatly in the closet, still carries the scent of the nights I had to hide, even from myself. I was a nurse in the war. I saw men scream without mouths left to scream. I saw women clutching their husbands' bones like they were holding on to faith. And in the middle of that chaos, with syringes in hand and my heart in pieces, I carried a secret inside my belly. Yes, I was pregnant, and no one could know. This isn't a story about victories. It's a story about choice, about sacrifice, about what a woman can bury inside herself when the war outside meets the war within. If you, watching this now, ever had to swallow your pain to keep someone else alive, or ever felt afraid to reveal the most fragile part of you, then stay with me till the end, because maybe, just maybe, this story could be yours too. If it touches your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. They say some days are born different, that the light hits the door frame a little strange, that the coffee takes longer to heat up, that your shoes slip out of your hands like they're trying to keep you home. That morning I felt all of that, but I didn't pay attention. It was just another day at war. Or at least, that's what I told myself so I could keep breathing. The wind shook the walls of the medical tent. The ground smelled like old ether and dried blood. And I, Eleanor May Whitaker, a nurse at war with trembling hands and a soul in shambles, held between my fingers a little glass tube with a yellowed slip of paper inside. The pregnancy test was primitive, of course, but it was all we had. And the color that rose in that pale liquid changed everything. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just took 2 steps back, like my own body had been infected by something that wasn't death, but wasn't exactly life either. It was a secret, alive, beating. Inside me, there, between barely rinsed syringes, morphine bottles wrapped in cloth, and voices begging for amputations, I discovered I was a mother, or almost, because motherhood in that setting wasn't a blessing. It was a sentence, maybe even a goodbye before the chance to say hello. I remember walking out of the tent still holding the tube. The sky was heavy, planes slicing the air with threats. The rush of boots through the camp mixed with the screech of gurneys being dragged across the dirt. I heard it all like I was underwater, every word, every siren, every command, all muffled. But my heart pounded. Loud. Way too loud. A new heartbeat inside my chest. Or maybe 2. Back then, being a nurse meant hiding everything. Fear, nausea, the urge to run. We were trained not to flinch, not to miss dose, not to look away from the face of a dying man who looked our brother's age. And I was good at it. Too good. But right then, with that test dripping through my fingers, I realized what they never taught us: how to hide an entire life inside your own body. I sat for hours behind the supply tent, listening to the clinking of penicillin vials and the radio spitting out code about the front line getting closer. I took a deep breath, put the tube in an empty matchbox, and stuffed the box deep down into my sock. Not for safety, but out of shame. Like hiding it could erase what had already begun to grow. That same night, I treated a wounded soldier who was whispering for his mama like she was right behind the tent wall. He squeezed my hand so hard he left bruises on my wrist. He didn't make it. But before he left, he whispered, "You've got Mother's hands." That almost broke me, because he saw, he knew, without knowing. In war, everything becomes a metaphor. Blood turns to ink. Pain becomes a number. love becomes a memory. And secrets? Oh, they become bricks. Bricks we stack inside our chest, just to keep going. I went to bed without eating. Faked a headache to skip the night shift. But the truth is, my body wasn't mine anymore. It moved to a new rhythm, a new time. Like the world's clock had nothing to do with the heartbeats now steering me. I had a strange dream. I was walking through a field of flowers in my nurse's uniform, and a small child held my index finger. I couldn't see their face, but I felt their hand, warm, alive, and in the sky, no planes, just silence, a silence that only peace brings, the kind we never knew in war. I woke up crying, but no one saw, and from then on, that became the rule. No one would see, not the other nurses, who hugged me at the end of each day like saying, "Another one survived." Not the doctors, too exhausted to even remember my name. Not the officers, who only saw efficiency, discipline, cold hands. Not even him, the man. The one who made me forget, for just one night, that I too was made of flesh and longing. He never knew. And maybe that was for the best. For weeks I lived like nothing had happened. Pulled my apron tighter, ate slower to fight the nausea, kept mint leaves under my tongue, faked toothaches, faked it all. But inside, my world was turning to dust. Me, who stitched up men with busted veins, who sewed torn skin with shaking hands, who stood beside mothers burying sons, was now hiding my own. It was a secret that walked with me, slept between my ribs, made me hesitate when I ran, taught me, right then and there, that some wars aren't meant to be won, only survived, and mine had just begun. There's nothing more watched in a war zone than a woman's body. You think you're free just because you wear an apron that smells like formaldehyde and have calloused hands from caring. But you're not. Every step is tracked. Every curve is measured. Every silence is read as either obedience or a threat. And I, who had trained every muscle in my face to look unshakable, started to realize my body wasn't mine anymore. The war out there didn't respect borders. But the one that started inside me was even more dangerous, because I had to hide two enemies at once: fear and change. Being a nurse during war meant living under the eyes of men used to ignoring women's pain, unless it was convenient. That's why I woke earlier than the others every morning, folded my blanket carefully, and got dressed in the dark without a mirror, just so I wouldn't have to face the new curve of my belly. I tightened my makeshift band of cloth, like I was trying to stop some invisible bleeding. Breathing got harder every day. But the worst part wasn't the pressure. It was the doubt. How long could I keep this up? I started avoiding group showers, said I had rashes, faked coughing fits to be alone. I didn't want anyone to see, not even the other women who, like me, lived inside fear and exhaustion. Because back then, a pregnant nurse was a logistical, moral, and political threat. There was no space for rounded bellies, only for bodies that served quietly someone else's mission. I remember one night especially, when they gave us new uniforms, cut tighter, made of thinner fabric. I put it on like it was a confession sewn into fabric. I looked at my shoulders, at the belly already starting to betray my discipline, and nearly cried, but I didn't, because there was a line of soldiers outside waiting for dressings, and one of them was looking at me with eyes that needed to believe I was strong enough to keep him here. And I was, at least on the outside. Over time, I created routines to protect myself. I tied cloth bands under my bust, filled my pockets with tools to draw attention away from my figure, spoke softly, walked straighter, and whenever I could, I'd place a tray or a dirty coat over my lap, an improvised shield. But the body, it spoke. No matter how much I tried to silence it, it had its own language, an ancient, ancestral language that said, "There's life here." And that was the hardest secret of all. Because you see, in war, life is always inconvenient. And in a woman's body it's even more unwelcome, especially when it shows up without permission. I felt the first movements on a heavy, humid afternoon, while stitching up a deep wound on an 18-year-old's thigh. I was sweating so much my hands slipped on the thread. And then, there it was, a soft flutter, like butterfly wings brushing the inside of my belly. I nearly fell off my chair. I pressed my knees together, took a deep breath, pretended it was a cramp. But inside I was shaking. Being a nurse and hiding a pregnancy was like walking through a minefield. One wrong step, one wrong move, and everything could collapse. And I'd already seen what happened to the girls who got found out. We didn't talk much about it, but we knew. One of them disappeared overnight. Another came back months later, silent, dry-eyed, walking like her bones were too heavy. They said she'd lost the baby. But back then, the word lost could mean 1,000 things. And that's when I learned. Not every secret is selfish. Sometimes it's a shield. My body, once an instrument of healing, had become a battlefield. Some days I threw up behind the tents, hidden. Other days the smell of ether made me faint. One doctor thought I had typhoid fever. I made sure he kept believing it. It's ironic how war teaches you to use lies as a form of survival. And even more ironic that, in that context, my true body would have been seen as betrayal. To keep going, I clung to rituals, heated lavender cloths when I could, sewed tiny fabric flowers into the hem of my uniform, where no one could see, prayed silently while washing my hands, and sometimes I talked to the baby, not out loud, just in my head, like whispering, "Just wait a little longer. Mama's trying to protect us." And that's exactly what I was doing. I had become two nurses in one body, one healing the world, the other trying to save just one life. And when at night I laid down with my back aching, chest tight, feet throbbing, I wondered, would I have enough time? Could I hide it till the end? I didn't know, but I knew I couldn't change, or grow, or draw attention, or be seen. My body was the secret, and at the same time it was proof that someday I'd be remembered for something no one ever saw. He walked into the infirmary with a cut above his brow and a look that seemed more lost than hurt. It was nighttime, and the lamplight flickered, making the faces around us look like shadows of people who hadn't decided whether to stay or go. But him, he looked at me like he already knew me, like he hadn't come for help, but for something he'd been missing. His name was Thomas R. Langston, infantry soldier 6'2", eyes the color of dusk in enemy territory, and a smile that felt like relief, even while bleeding. When I stepped closer to clean the wound, he didn't flinch, just looked at me. "You've got hands that don't hurt," he said. And that stuck with me like a prayer, because at that point in the war, no one spoke sweetly anymore. No one saw beauty in a nurse's hands. They only saw function. That was the moment, between one stitch and the next, when my secret began to grow a name. Not because I told him, but because he, unknowingly, started living in the same place where that baby was already growing, right in the middle of my silence. Thomas came back to the infirmary a few times, sometimes injured, sometimes just with a fever, sometimes just to see me. And I let him. It was madness, I know. But in a routine where all we knew was burying, amputating, and enduring, he was the first man who made me feel alive again, who reminded me that before I was a nurse, before I was made pregnant by silence, I had been a woman, whole, wanting, hungry for touch, for a hug, for skin pressed against skin. We didn't have a romance. There were no promises, no flowers, no notes hidden in boots. What we had was one night. Just one. And it wasn't even planned. It was raining hard, the field hospital was packed, and he was sleeping on one of the canvas cots in the back of the tent. I was doing rounds, checking pulses bed by bed, and when I reached his, he opened his eyes slowly and whispered, "Just stay a minute." And I did. He didn't pull me. I didn't ask. But his body touched mine like the world had paused. And the kiss happened the way some things do. Not to be explained, only felt. That night my belly already held what he would never know. But I didn't know it yet. And maybe that's why I allowed myself to feel it without guilt. We made love between gauze and sweat-stained sheets from other men. A quiet love. Scared. Urgent. But true. And when he fell asleep, I sat on the floor and looked at him like someone staring at a star they know they'll never touch again. I knew he'd be leaving soon, that his unit would be moved, and that everything we had would fit into that one single night. The next day we didn't speak, just exchanged a look, and that was the last one. I found out he'd left camp 2 weeks later. A truck came to pick up the fit soldiers. He was one of them. I didn't move when I heard his name on the list. It was like hearing the end of a book you never got to start. And I held that name inside me with the same strength I used to hold on to the child he'd never meet. The secret became solid. No longer just about me, but about us. About what could have been. About what was. And no one saw. A few months later I got a letter with no name. A man's handwriting, short words, no return address. It simply said, "If you're still out there, think of me when it rains. I think of you." I tucked the letter inside a coffee tin, along with socks that no longer fit, and the button from the uniform I lost during labor. Because somehow, it was all part of the same story. Fragments of something never spoken. But that shaped everything that came next. He never knew. And maybe that was for the best. Because what kind of life would he have lived, knowing he left a child behind in the middle of bombs? That he loved a nurse for one night, and gave life in a place filled with death? I ask myself that to this day. And sometimes when the rain begins to slide down the windows of my creaky wooden house, I wonder, did he ever think of me too? Did he ever miss something he didn't know he'd lost? I never found out if he survived. I never looked for him. And even if I had, he was just one name among thousands, one face in the wreckage, one silence among many. But deep down, I think he was the only part of the war that reminded me of who I was, before everything turned into a secret. Some people associate war with the sound of bombs. But me, I associate it with that smell. The smell of fresh blood mixed with rust, sweat, burnt flesh, and antiseptic. That smell still follows me, even after all these decades. It soaked into my memory deeper than any explosion ever could. And maybe it was there, between blood-soaked gauze and discarded sheets, that my secret took root. War has its own clock, but it doesn't tick with hands, it ticks with bodies. Every new wounded man pushed into the tent meant time had moved forward, and every confirmed death was a pause, a kind of breath in the rhythm of dying. And I, war nurse, tried to time my body in the middle of all that chaos. I measured time through soft contractions, morning sickness, barely there kicks in my lower belly, and all of that I kept to myself. While I healed others, I bled inside. One night, a young farm girl arrived at our tent, in labor. She wasn't military. She'd come from a nearby village, had been raped by soldiers, and ran through the woods for 2 days until she found us. She didn't speak our language, but her eyes screamed, and her body trembled like it was being torn apart from the inside. I was the one who received her. I was the one who helped her give birth. I was the one who watched that baby slide into the world, covered in blood and mud, while the mother cried without making a sound. And I was the one who cut the umbilical cord with a field knife. And when that baby finally cried, my whole body responded. Because somehow, that cry was also the one I'd been holding in. That sound reminded me, you're a mother too, Eleanor. Even if no one knows, even if you can't say it. In that moment, I wanted to scream, to run, to lock myself somewhere deep in the woods and let the war go on without me. But all I did was wipe the woman's face, clean the baby with a warm cloth, and clench my jaw so hard it made my teeth ache. After the village was evacuated, the woman disappeared with the baby in her arms. We never saw her again. But I kept the bloodied towel I used that night. I washed it, folded it, and hid it under my pillow. It was the only piece of myself I could safely touch back then. Sometimes I think the nurse I was split in two right then. One part kept caring for the wounded. The other started caring for something invisible. A silence that had weight and shape. In the tent, the men screamed. But between one scream and the next, there were pauses. And in those pauses, my secret spoke to me. In every muffled groan, I heard what no one else could. It was the woman I was trying to hide, whispering to myself, "You're still alive." During one shift, I felt a sharp stab in my belly, so strong my hands gave out. I was stitching a deep gash on a sergeant's leg. The needle slipped, a small cut on my finger. Nothing serious. But the blood, my blood, dripped onto his sheet. And in that instant, for the first time, I panicked about what could happen. I ran from the tent like I'd seen a ghost, went behind the latrines, threw up silently, then sat between two trash barrels and cried, not from pain, but from helplessness. Because war doesn't allow breaks, not for mothers, not for fear. That night I wrote a letter, not addressed to anyone. I just wrote, "If you ever come looking for me, my child, know that I tried. I tried the only way I could, and if the world says I hid, you tell them I fought. But my trench was inside me. I kept that letter in my bra for 3 days. Then I buried it, not out of shame, but because it was the only place words couldn't be found. Being a nurse means carrying more than medicine. It means carrying stories no one could bear to hear. And my story, no one ever asked, because everyone believed I was strong. Strong Eleanor, the one who didn't cry, who treated 15 men a day, who never flinched, even under crossfire. They didn't know. But I died a little every time I washed my hands, because I saw my own blood going down the drain. And it reminded me that while I saved others, I was losing myself. The secret got heavier. Not on my body, on time. Because the days kept repeating, and I had no idea how many I had left before the baby arrived. In the last week of that month, I counted the cloth diapers left in medical storage, did the math in my head, marked 3 dates in a dirty notebook, with codes only I would understand. And I decided, if I can't hide this till the end, I'll disappear. No one will see my child born among scalpels and shelling. If they're going to be born in the dark, let it be a worthy kind of dark. But no one will take them from me without my permission. From that day on, I started carrying a syringe of morphine hidden in my sleeve. Not for anyone else, for me. In case I needed to numb myself, or silence myself. That's how you survive war. With hidden love, with buried letters, with smells that never fade. And with secrets you learn to wear like a second skin. I never thought a piece of paper could hold so much power. But in war, everything gains weight. A rusty spoon can become an heirloom. A button can become a memory of a lost love. And a simple ID card can become a sentence. Mine was small, yellowed at the edges, my name handwritten in the shaky script of a tired soldier. Eleanor M. Whitaker, volunteer nurse, registry 278B. That scrap of paper was my face, my pass through checkpoints, my key into restricted zones, my proof of existence. But only as a function, not as a person. And maybe that's why, one day, staring at it, I realized it didn't represent me anymore. The woman described there was clean, precise, available, obedient. But the woman I'd become was a sea of silence, pregnant, sweaty, scared, and still healing open wounds with steady hands. That morning the superiors arrived for a surprise inspection. Rumors said they were searching for unstable elements. Their words, not mine. One nurse had been removed days earlier for emotional collapse. Another because there were whispers of improper relations with soldiers. I couldn't risk anything. Not even the faintest rumor. Not one sideways glance. So I did what I thought I had to do. I tore up my identification card. First in 2, then 4, then 6 pieces. I didn't cry. Just took a deep breath, like ripping off a bandage stuck to raw flesh. Then I burned the pieces. Right there behind the infirmary, with a prayer candle someone had left behind. The paper shriveled, turned to ash, and floated into the wind like it had never existed. In that moment, I disappeared, officially, from the war's map. I was still there, in uniform, with my cap, with pins at my waist, still saving lives, still a nurse. But to the system, I was no one. And strangely, that brought me relief, because an invisible woman can protect her secrets better. With that card gone, I became a functional ghost, worked in the background, took shifts with younger nurses, pretended I'd been issued new documents, an easy excuse in a place where records were always being shuffled. I started sleeping in a side tent, far from the main quarters, smaller, stuffier, but it gave me what I needed most, solitude. In that space, I hid a small box where I'd placed 3 things. The ID bracelet from a baby I'd helped deliver, a button ripped from Thomas's coat, and the handkerchief I clutched the first time I felt my baby kick. That handkerchief became my altar. I folded it and tucked it under my pillow each night. It was the only soft thing in all that chaos. There, I prayed, whispered, made promises, asked forgiveness, because what was growing inside me already had a name, even if only I knew it. Not a baptismal name, but a name of presence. I called him my little silence, because that's what he was, a living silence, a silence with a heartbeat. Over time, I noticed others could see I was changing, but no one said anything. An older nurse handed me bread one morning and whispered, "You need to eat for 2 now." And she looked straight into my eyes, but there was no judgment, just a squeeze on the arm. And that was enough. In times of war, words mean less than gestures. And silence can be an agreement. I knew I couldn't stay there much longer. My body wasn't cooperating. The bands I used were getting too tight. The uniform could no longer hide everything. That's when I made a plan. I'd use supplies from the post to assemble an emergency birth kit. Have everything on hand, in case I had to do it alone. And above all, I decided not to register the child under my name. The secret would have to be born nameless. No records, no inheritance, and maybe no mother. That choice broke me, but it was mine. The only one I could make in a world where even love was seen as a threat. Sometimes I sat by the creek at night, trying to picture the future. My whole body, my soul rinsed clean, and a child walking in some other town, with other parents. Another life. A life where the sound of war wouldn't chase him, where he wouldn't be the child of guilt or of absence. That's why I tore the card. That's why I deleted my name from history. Because some mothers have to disappear, so their children can appear. No one would have understood that back then. Maybe not even today. But there are things we don't do for ourselves. We do them for them. My secret was growing, and I had to start preparing, to let it go. In war, you learn to hold a lot of things. Trays, bodies, moans, promises. But the hardest thing to hold is the tears, because they don't wait for the right moment. They come when a boy dies in your arms, when the letter from home arrives too late, when you finish wiping up the blood and still feel the floor shaking, even though the bombing has stopped. But I learned not to cry, not out of strength, but out of necessity. Because in that field, a nurse who cries is seen as weak, and a weak woman doesn't survive. The other girls' eyes were mirrors. We all knew what we were hiding. Secrets, trauma, and a quiet fear of being found out, whether for an unplanned pregnancy or feelings that couldn't be said out loud. Once I saw one of the nurses walk into the locker room and come out 5 minutes later with dry eyes, but tear-stained skin. She washed her face, put on her apron, and went back to giving injections like nothing had happened. And no one said a word. In war, no one asks about tears that don't hit the floor. It was with these women that I learned the art of silence. How hands can say more than words. How a squeeze on the shoulder can mean, I know, or I'm here, even without sound. Time passed, and I became more and more like stone. The kind that heals, yes, but no longer breaks. The baby moved inside me at the worst times. Sometimes in the middle of a surgery. Other times while I was hauling buckets of boiling water or lifting men heavier than me. And I clenched my teeth, swallowed the discomfort, tied the cloth band tighter around my belly, and kept going. Because being a nurse at war was a constant performance, and I had to play the part. One night the pain was so intense I thought I'd pass out. But instead, I smiled, made a joke with the doctor, handed out dressings like nothing was wrong. And only later, alone in my tent, I bit into my fist until I left a mark, just to keep from crying. That became my ritual for weeks. Hold it in, keep going, suffer in silence. And the more I hid, the more the secret became part of my body. Like it was shaping me. Like silence had grown into a new organ, right alongside my child. Some nights I heard the others crying, muffled sobs. Other times, nervous laughter. We took turns in the back of the tent, like a sad chorus of voices that no longer knew how to name their pain. One early morning I found a scribbled note on the floor. No name. It simply said, "If I don't die on the outside, I die on the inside." I kept that line close, wrote it on the back of my hand with charcoal, read it every time the world started going dark inside me. Around that time I started looking after a younger nurse, fresh from the south. She had eyes too wide, still full of hope, and she asked everything. "Aren't you ever scared, Eleanor? Don't you miss home? Don't you ever cry?" And I lied. Told her fear goes away, that homesickness fades, and that crying doesn't help. She believed me, because she needed to. But I knew. One day she'd learn to go quiet too. What no one knew was that, by then, my greatest pain wasn't the fear of being found out. It was the fear of what came after. I asked myself every day, what will be left of me after the birth? Who will I be if I can't wear this apron anymore? If I can't pretend I'm just a nurse, just a soldier, just a professional. Because deep down, the uniform was my armor. And my secret was the only thing that reminded me that under that armor, there was still skin. There was still a woman. Some nights I dreamed of my mother. She'd be combing my hair like she used to when I was little. And she'd whisper, "You are strong. But you're also made of water. Don't forget that." I'd wake up with wet eyes. But still, I didn't cry. I saved every tear for the right moment. The moment he'd be born. The moment I could finally let it all spill. Everything I'd been forced to hold. But that moment hadn't come yet. And until it did, I kept going. Step by step, hand over belly, apron over chest, silence over silence. Because war nurses don't cry. But they love. And sometimes, that love has the face of a child no one else gets to see. It happened on a moonless night, the kind where the silence of the earth screams louder than any siren, when my body finally decided to stop pretending. The post was swallowed in darkness, the lamplight flickering out with the wind, and the only soundtrack was the sound of rats scurrying between the tents. War seemed to have paused that night, but inside me, it was just beginning. I woke up with a sharp stab in my belly. The pain climbed like an upside-down knife, slicing from the base of my spine to the center of my chest. I was lying on my side, the scarf wrapped around my stomach slipping down my ribs. I felt sweat trickle between my breasts, even with the sharp cold of the night, and I knew the time had come. No one was around. The other nurse on duty had been called out to treat a grenade accident at the front. The doctors were asleep, worn out. And me, I was there, alone, with trembling hands and a heart pounding like an alarm drum. There was no midwife, no bed, no one to hold my hand. So I dragged myself out of the tent. Every step was a battle. My knees felt disconnected from my body. My lungs couldn't get enough air. And the contractions hit like fierce waves, slamming me into the dry earth. I chose a dark spot, behind the supply tent, where we kept boxes of cotton, expired morphine, dull scalpels, and blood-stained rags. That dirt had seen so many deaths, and now it would witness a birth. But no one would know. I laid out a makeshift tarp, got on my knees, bit down on my own fist so I wouldn't scream. Because there, in that hidden curve of the world, a nurse couldn't be a mother, and a mother couldn't make noise, or call for help, or cry out. The secret had to be born in the dark. My body twisted like it wanted to eject me from myself. I talked to God, to the baby, to my mother, to any ancestor who still remembered my name. I begged for strength, for silence, for mercy. Between contractions, I felt a tear. Blood started pouring down my legs like part of the rain that never fell. The pain was total as war, but more intimate, deeper. I placed my hands on my belly, whispered, "Hold on." Because if he gave up, everything would have been for nothing. The cloth wrap I wore for months, the loose clothes, the short answers, the clenched heart, the torn ID card. All of it would have meant just fear. But he fought, and I fought with him. There, on that hard top, with my knees covered in dirt and my soul raw and exposed, I put my hands between my legs and felt it. The head, warm, round, real. I started to push, alone. No instructions, no help. Just the instinct of someone who spent months stitching up other people's lives, and now had to save her own. It took long minutes, or hours. I don't know. Wartime isn't measured by clocks. And then he came. My son, covered in blood, silence, and dim light. No cry, no scream. For a moment I thought he was born dead. But when I pressed my lips to his forehead and whispered his secret name, he breathed, a faint sound, but alive, as if to say, "I'm here, Mama. I heard you." I cried for the first time, not loudly, but enough for my tears to wet his forehead. It was just the two of us, and the world felt suspended. I cut the cord with an emergency scalpel, wrapped the baby in my apron, the same apron that had seen so much blood, and now became a cradle. I looked around. The camp slept. The war took a deep breath, getting ready for another day of killing. And I, lying beside my son, was the nurse who lived to tell, the woman who didn't scream, the mother who gave birth in secret, and who, now, had to disappear again. I stood up with effort, cleaned the ground, buried the dirty rags, saved what I could, returned to the tent like it was just any other night. The baby. I hid him beneath the lining of a laundry basket, wrapped, warm, with a folded note. "Please keep him safe. He is made of courage, of silence, and of love." Hours later, when the others woke up, I already had a clean uniform, a washed face, steady hands. A young man handed me a tray of coffee and said, "You look lighter today, Whitaker." I smiled and said, "Must be the air." But what no one knew was that night, I thought I was going to die. And in a way I did, because the woman who walked back into that tent was no longer the same. Some cries are meant to echo, others to fade before they're even born. His cry, I carry it in my ears like a whisper only I ever heard. A short cry, fragile, but whole. And it was enough to let me know he was alive. That night still pulses inside me, not because it was the hardest, but because it was the quietest. The world felt deaf, the tent mute. The camp breathed like a sleeping animal, and only my belly was screaming. After my son was born, I wrapped him in my apron, the same one I used to stop bleeding, clean pus, hold broken bones together. Now it was cradling the most sacred thing that ever passed through my arms. I held him for a short time, maybe 20 minutes, maybe 2 centuries, because time at war doesn't know how to measure things like that. I touched every inch of him with fear and reverence. His tiny clenched fists, his flattened nose, the trembling breath, and the warmth of life I had hidden for so long, and that now burned in my chest with love. But I couldn't stay. The cry, even muffled, was a risk. With every sound he made, my heart stopped. If someone heard, if someone walked in, it would all be over. So I placed him at the bottom of the laundry basket, lined it with cotton, covered him with cloth, left a small bottle with makeshift milk made from the tip of a syringe, and the note. Writing it was the hardest part, because there wasn't enough paper to say all I wanted to say. No ink could capture what my heart was screaming. I wrote only, "This is my son. He was born on the battlefield, but he deserves peace. If you can, take him, love him, give him what I never will, and tell him, one day, that his mother was a nurse, and that she loved him, in silence." I folded it, tucked it in with him, and walked away. I didn't look back, because if I did, I'd stay. I went back to my routine like someone returning from the grave. Washed instruments, changed dressings, recorded temperatures, listened to complaints, walked past the other nurses like it was just another day. But inside, everything was rubble. My soul, in ruins. No one noticed, no one asked. Maybe because, in war, everyone carries their own cross so heavily, there's no breath left to look at someone else's thorns. At the end of the day, a French nun who worked in the laundry passed by with a strange smile on her face. She took half a second longer than usual to look at me, and I knew. she had found him. She didn't say a word. But in that glance, she told me everything. That she picked up the baby. That she read the note. That she understood. And that she would take care of him. She touched my shoulder like a blessing and walked on. That's how my son left the battlefield. Not in an official truck, not with a birth certificate, but in the arms of a veiled woman, between pillowcases and dirty uniforms. And no one heard his cry. But me. I still hear it. He shows up in my dreams like an echo. Sometimes like a laugh, sometimes like a breath, but always reminding me, you did what you could, Mama. That week, I bled again, or something like it. A deep, painful purge, like my body was washing away the last traces. I cried in secret, hidden in the supply tent, biting down on the hem of my skirt. Because now, it wasn't physical pain. It was mourning. Grief for a secret that had a name, a scent, warmth. And that, even though it survived, had left me. From then on, I started keeping a white handkerchief in my pocket. No one knew why, but I did. It was the only visible memory of the child only I had known. In war, we lose pieces of ourselves. Some are torn away by shrapnel, others by love. And the piece I lost that silent night never came back. They say you reap what you sow, but in war, that's not how it works. Sometimes you plant love and reap silence. Plant life and reap distance. Plant hope and end up with a name forgotten. Because on that dry, war-ravaged ground, what grows doesn't follow logic, only survival. After that night when I gave my son to the world and to the wind, life went on. Or better said, pretended to. My body went back to obeying shifts. My voice went back to answering orders. My hands went back to stopping bleeding. But inside, everything was out of order. I carried on as if it had all just been a bad dream. But every step, every smell, every sound brought back the memory I had to bury. Because now, my secret didn't live inside me anymore. It lived out there. In a place I didn't know. In the arms of someone I'd never see again. And still, I felt him. Felt when he slept. Felt when he cried. Felt it every time the wind hit the tent flaps with a different whistle. It was like a part of my body had split off and kept sending messages back to me. I started walking differently. No more rushing. No more precision. I started pausing, closing my eyes in the middle of shifts, pressing the white handkerchief in my pocket like it was a sacred relic. And the world started noticing. One of the head nurses called me in one night, wanted to know if I was unstable, said my eyes had been too wet lately, that the boys missed my usual sharpness. I told her I was just tired, that the workload was heavy, that back pain was throwing off my focus. She believed me, or pretended to, because maybe she had a secret too. That night I knew my time there was ending. I was no longer that invisible, efficient nurse. My body had changed, my soul even more, and even if no one knew the full story, others' intuition could feel it. And in war, intuition is dangerous. So I asked for a transfer, said I needed air, another camp, another breath. The reply came quickly. You've given enough. Go. They didn't know how much that sentence hurt, because I had given everything. My youth, my innocence, my child. They handed me a certificate of exemplary service, an official letter with a smudged signature, and a train ticket north. I accepted it like someone accepts exile. I arrived in a small village where the field hospital was set up inside an old convent. Stone walls, tall windows, and a silence that was no longer war, but longing. There I cared for the elderly, widows, Hungry children, no soldiers, but no wound. I treated there was deeper than the one I carried in my chest. Every night I sat by the window of my room, feet dangling in the cold air, and I thought of him. Was he okay? Had they changed his clothes? Given him a bath? Had they read the note? Had they told him he was loved? These questions became my routine. I carried them like a silent rosary. Time passed. Months. Maybe a year. The war seemed to grow tired. And then came the news. Ceasefire. Flags. Parades. People crying in the streets. I watched it all from inside the convent, hands in my lap, eyes empty. Because for me, the war had ended a long time ago. On that moonless night. With that muffled cry. With that laundry basket that took away my reason to breathe. I came home with a small suitcase, a diploma, a few medals, and a body that no longer fit into any category. They called me a hero, a woman of strength, an ex-war nurse. But no one knew I was a mother. And more than that, a mother to a child who didn't carry my name, or my scent, or my story. That was the cruelest part. Knowing he would grow up, but far away. That maybe he'd see my face on the street and not know me. That maybe he'd call me ma'am, or not call me anything at all. And me, I called him every day, by the name I never got to say out loud. That was the path life handed me. That was the fate I didn't choose. Every nurse wears a uniform, but some of us also wear what can't be seen. Me, for example. I've always worn my silence like part of my apron. While tying the straps behind my back, pinning my hair under the cap, swallowing pain with faucet water, the silence was already there, like invisible fabric, like armor, like inheritance. Over the years, my apron absorbed everything. Blood, vomit, spilled coffee, antiseptic, and baby powder. But what clung to it the most was absence, because every day putting it on felt like saying to myself, today too, no one will know. I spent my life being seen as the woman who helps, the one who soothes, who saves, who never trembles. Even after the war, that role stuck to me like a second skin. In the little town where I lived, everyone said, "There's Miss Eleanor, retired nurse, good woman, polite, quiet." And they were right, but only halfway. The other half, no one ever saw. No one knew that every night before bed, I placed that white handkerchief under my pillow, the same one I wrapped my son in, the one that held his scent for a brief moment, the one that soaked up my tears before I learned not to cry anymore. The secret became my room, my furniture, my posture. It showed up in the way I dodged certain questions, in the way I talked about Paris but never mentioned the hospitals, in the way I smiled with my lips, but not with my eyes. Years went by like that, watching others marry, raise children, tell stories, and I was always one step behind, as if my soul had stayed on the battlefield, while my body aged. One day a young woman asked why I never had children. She was pregnant, beaming, and wanted to know if I regretted it. I smiled back and said, "Not everything we love is visible." She didn't understand, and that's okay, because the truth is, my son existed, and still exists, somewhere, with another name, another mother, but also with a part of me, a glance, a gesture, maybe the habit of fiddling with his fingers when he's nervous, like I did when I hid my belly behind loose aprons. I never told anyone, not the other nurses, not the pastor when I came home, not even my husband, who was good, yes, but never knew the parts of me that were off limits, not even my eldest daughter, who always wanted to know everything, and now helps me pick scarves to match my aging skin. I never said a word, never dared, because some silences we don't keep, they keep us. And this silence has been my home all these years. You may wonder why. Why not tell? Why not write it down, record it, share this emotional story? And the answer, my dear, isn't in the words. It's in the spaces between them. In the pause after a sigh. In the gaze that pretends to see the present, but is trapped in the past. In the way we change the subject when the memory starts to sting. Some loves aren't meant to be spoken. They're meant to be felt. That's all. Time taught me that some pain doesn't need to be screamed. Some wounds prefer the dark, and some secrets bloom in silence. Today, with my bones aching and my hands still remembering the weight of a newborn, I say, I was a nurse in the war, and in the middle of the bombs, I gave birth to a love no one saw, but one that shaped everything I've become. And if I could go back, I'd do it all again. Because not every flower needs sunlight to bloom. Some bloom in the dark, but they bloom just the same. Time does to us what war began. It distorts, softens, warps, but it also soothes, as if to say, you can rest now. Today I live in a small wooden house where the wind whistles through the cracks like it's calling me by a name no one else remembers. The walls hear everything. They know what was hidden, what was surrendered, what was lost. And the handkerchief, it's still here, folded, tucked away, clean, as if it never touched blood. But I know, it remembers. Sometimes when I wake earlier than I need to, I swear I hear a baby crying from far, far away. It's not a hallucination. It's memory. It's my soul remembering that once I was a mother. No cradle, no birth certificate, no rights. I was a nurse in the war. I was a refugee for other people's fear. And I hid, inside me, the greatest love I've ever known. A love that had to be born in silence, grow without me, and go on to its destiny with another name, another story, but with the same breath of life that came from my body on that moonless night. I've learned that not all motherhood is visible, that not every child needs our last name to carry our soul, and that some secrets are actually shields, even when they hurt more than the truth. If you've listened to this story all the way through, maybe you understand. Maybe you've kept too much inside too. Or maybe you're waiting for someone to say, you did what you could. So let me be that voice, with all the truth these old eyes carry. You did what you could. And that is love. And if one day you're afraid you loved the wrong way, remember me. Me, who loved in the dark, and still bloomed. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment. Maybe your silence and mine are closer than we think. And if you want more people to hear what so few dare to say, like, share, and subscribe. Sometimes all a story needs is a pair of ears willing to listen.